So thank you all. I'm Allan Mustard. We'll be chairing this session very briefly to introduce the panelists. To my immediate right is Eric Stewart, an old friend who is Executive Director of the US-Turkmen Business Council. Then next is Sobir Kurbanov of the Center for International Private Enterprise, also has some previous work, but he's going to talk about economic security, and that's going to be quite interesting. Next is Dr. Ayoob Ayoobi of Project C.U.R.E. Project C.U.R.E. is a medical equipment, supplies, and services NGO based in Colorado. And he's going to give us a perspective on the geopolitical importance of harnessing economic and business development in Central Asia. And at the far end, another old friend, Elena. She brings 3 Central Asian countries to the table from the business perspective, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan. So we have a very good panel.
Uzbekistan as well.
Uzbekistan, yeah. We're just going to get started. So Elena, you get to go first, ladies first.
All right, well.
And to the speakers, I'm going to cut you off at 12 minutes. No fooling around because we are short of time.
Sure. So I'll just read through very quickly. And if you have any questions, please come to me after the session. But thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. And my special thanks to Sebastian and his team for organizing such a fantastic event. It's actually nice to be here and to the place that helped jumpstart my professional career. I graduated from the Master's in International Policy and Practice here from the Elite School in 2008. And so it's great to be in the company of dedicated professionals that help run the ESI. So, and please join me in giving them a round of applause. So when preparing for this panel, I just decided to Google the definition of empowerment, given the focus of this panel on empowering Central Asia, advancing economic growth and business opportunities. So as you know, the internet is a wonderful thing. It never disappoints you. And it actually provides me with a few definitions that help me choose the best suited one for today's discussion. And so the definition of empowerment is as follows. Empowerment is to know yourself and understand your motivations, as well as your strengths and weaknesses. Quite a powerful statement. So empowerment is about identifying your goals, identifying the aspects of your life that are the most important to you and where you can create meaningful change. So empowerment is also about developing your competencies and focusing on the skills or qualities that will allow you to reach your goals. So now let's examine the definition of empowerment in the context of Central Asia and the business environment. Is Central Asia self-empowered to be a region of significance to American companies? And that's the topic of my discussion today. So to respond to this question, I would like you to think of the popular game Tetris. Okay, here we go. All right. So you probably know what Tetris is all about. I played Tetris when I was younger and when I had more time on my hand, but I didn't know that these little figurines actually called tetrominos. So as you know, the game involves shaped pieces called tetrominos descending from the top of the playing field. And as a player, you have the power to manipulate and rotate them into place in hopes of completing and clearing lines before they build up and overwhelm you. Well, think of Central Asia as a tetromino that needs to fit and fall into the right place to become an integral part of the global economy. And the question is it doable? Yes, but it requires a very skillful enabler, in this case, you as a player, to analyze, anticipate, mobilize, strategize, and make a collective decision on the best opportunities for American companies to fit in, or in today's competitive world, better to say to squeeze in. So, however, life is never black and white. And so now imagine that the player is not Central Asia. The player is the American business community, deciding where the region should be placed in the global supply chain. And ideally, we all want Central Asia to be a hero, which is a straightforward horizontal line. But unfortunately, the reality is not black and white. And sometimes it's an orange Ricky, also known as blue Ricky, or which is also known as Cleveland Z, and so on and so forth. So how can we make Central Asia an American hero? And I should say, I should recognize actually the role of the Central Asian embassies and Central Asian governments in becoming a more attractive place for American companies. But here are just a few maybe tips and hints on how to make it even more attractive and how really to become America's hero. So last year I had a dinner with several of my companies. All of them were Fortune 100 companies. We gathered in Central Asia, and I asked them a very simple question. I said, name the most profitable marketplace for all of you. So guess what country they all called? The United States of America. Not surprising, right? So, and here, as a leading US business organization that we represent here, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, as well as Afghanistan, which is currently on hold because of the situation there, our biggest challenge is convincing American companies, especially SMEs, to leave their most profitable market for unknown territory with a different business culture. And I'll make an emphasis on business culture because that's what makes it different for us to work in Central Asia, financial regulations, and operating environment. So my number one suggestion is for the regional business audience to put themselves in the shoes of American business and think about whether they will invest in their own economy and calculate their return on investments. At the same time, I do encourage all American companies to put themselves in the shoes of Central Asian governments so that they can understand the reality and make proper assessments. As many of you know, working with American companies is not easy. The US was created by lawyers, driven by lawyers, and our 3 business councils actually are chaired by lawyers. So it's a very complex operating environment, not as easy. It's also very bureaucratic. So the US, however, is also driven by a set of business principles requiring each company to make responsible choices on behalf of their shareholders to invest in the right economy. So companies report to their shareholders, which is a very important moment, very important aspect that Central Asian audience sometimes is not aware of. So, and the decision-making process here in the United States is lengthy. It requires a thorough review of macroeconomic stability, legal norms, trade tariffs, supply chains, and et cetera, and whether the presented opportunities are worth pursuing. So as an example, we are often approached by Central Asian companies with the same or almost identical request, for example, to create a confectionery factory in one market, but then we receive similar requests from other markets for similar projects. So I think that sometimes it's worth us, or as a business community, help them identify one project that will be of interest to the entire region and will be of stronger interest to American companies. And ultimately, everybody will have a win-win situation and a much higher chance of winning the deal with the American business. There are also repeated calls for regional collaboration, and we are the ones who actually do call and support this collaboration. But unfortunately, collaboration is not always a straightforward process. First and foremost, all of us must be considerate and respectful of each country's continued nation-building process. And secondly, we need to be mindful of the impact of social media that has radically changed our views on the government and business and falsely empowered us to think that we know how to run both. So most importantly, today's trends made us believe that the results should be imminent and there is no time for error or delays. We want to control the process and dictate when, how, and how much. So the next suggestion that I have is for the regional audience to allow Western businesses and American companies to decide where to invest, how much to invest, and when to withdraw the return on investments so that they can reinvest inside or outside the region. And so the goal, I think, there is, again, it's a win-win for potential investors and American businesses to have confidence that as a region, they do get American companies, so that the region understands the business, and no matter which country business lands in, it will have the same norms, laws, attitudes, and standards. In other words, market access will be the same no matter what. And when it comes to regional collaboration, I don't want you to go too far. I don't want you to go to another geographies. Just look at American business. Each company in this room that we represent has a division that looks after Central Asia, Caucasus, and Turkey. Sometimes it also includes Middle East and North Africa. As you can see, they do look at the region. So next suggestion is to help our companies that cover the region to work on regulatory issues and support them by fostering a more robust business to government dialogue and on a regional platform or on a bilateral platform, it doesn't matter. But we do encourage everybody to listen to the needs of the business. But also we do encourage Central Asian audience not to be shy of sharing their own values because we all want to have mutually beneficial opportunities. And I just want to repeat this, that American business is not in the business of taking advantage of our clients. Otherwise we will be out of business. We're in the business of making profits for all involved. And I would like to take a moment to share how we have contributed to the regional cooperation. And I know that Sobir will speak about this, and I do appreciate CIPE's contribution into building the regional cooperation momentum. In 1993, a small group of companies created American-Uzbekistan Chamber of Commerce. Today, we are more than 30 years old. We are the oldest in Central Asia, in Eurasia space, and we represent major companies such as Apple, Google, White & Case, Visa, Coca-Cola, Valmont, GE, GM, and so forth. In 2014, when preparations for the first C5+1 inaugural meeting were just taking off, we, together with Eric Stewart, met privately with the State Department officials and encouraged them to create a business platform for regional dialogue as a spin-off of their geopolitical discussions in the region. So, and our view was that trade benefits everyone, and we were right. Despite tensions and conflicts, intra-regional trade remains one of the most positive dynamics of the region. And again, business has taken quite a lead in many aspects. And in 2016, when political relations between Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan were rather tense, we, the business, created the US-Kyrgyzstan Business Council and US-Tajikistan Business Council. So American companies took a calculated risk to work on the region as a whole and have a more thorough review of the business opportunities. Last but not least, in 2019, we organized the first historic business discussion with 6 Central Asian ambassadors to the US, including Afghanistan. And the same year, we held the very first Central Asian panel with top ministers representing all 6 regions covered. So we are genuinely not observers, but we are practitioners of the regional cooperation. And many members work in our region, and they know the benefits of working in Central Asia as well as outside of Central Asia. So that's kind of like a conclusion. In conclusion, I'd like to maybe share with the audience here, and since we have many think tanks and policymakers here, let's not just label Central Asia as Eurasian or post-Soviet Union. And actually, it was very similar offer made by the EU ambassador to Kazakhstan. And what I do encourage everybody to study the experience of markets outside Eurasia and remove the labels that put Central Asia in a box where they feel restricted, or even American companies. So we really want to become the right Tetris, a critical place of the puzzle that global economy cannot move without. And again, there is a lot of work to be done, but I do encourage everybody not to be driven by impulses or calls to create and do something more and new. Let's not spend time inventing another bicycle. Let's spend time wisely. It is a priceless commodity. So let's look at what we have, what works, and make sure that when working as a region, all our interests are considered and included. And be mindful that, as with any process, any losses are on us, but the gains are rewarding enough to be worth collaborating as a region. And so once again, I would like to thank the audience, all of you, for being part of this discussion and for your continued interest, and as well as Central Asian governments and the US government for bringing this place into the right spotlight. So I hope I kind of like fit into the 12-minute limit.
You hit it with 26 seconds to spare.
Well done, thank you.
I want to see who can beat that. All right. Next is Eric Stewart, head of the US-Turkmenistan Business Council.
So most of you don't realize I'm at a huge disadvantage in my seat because I have Allan Mustard sitting next to me, who was the ambassador to Turkmenistan for 4 years, and he can easily throw the red flag on anything I say and challenge. You will find when you listen to my remarks, I love Turkmenistan. It is a great place. I love all of Central Asia, but Turkmenistan for me is a special place. And I want to start sort of going back in history. When I was in the government 20 years ago, we would meet with the Central Asians in a group setting, right, through USTR and Commerce and others. And it was always Central Asia, Central Asia, Central Asia. And they would all come together. And as you can imagine, 20 years ago, it was a little bit less togetherness as there is more today. And our Turkmen counterpart and Kazakhs and Uzbeks would sit aside across from us and just stare. And they did not want to talk in front of their neighbors. They didn't want to talk in front of their competitors. They didn't want to say anything. And so we talked about, you know, all the same things we still talk about today when we talk regional Central Asia, but we didn't get a lot done. And what we were able to do is then realize we need to have individual bilateral discussions, not Central Asia regional discussions, right? And there is a place for the regional discussions, but the individual are critical. And so we ended up doing both. We had the group meetings and then we had the individual meetings, and the government continues to do that today. And that is the right approach. And I look at it from my standpoint of I'm trying to sell my house right now as I recently became an empty nester. And I imagine if I was sitting in my neighborhood and 4 other houses were for sale and I got to meet with one person looking to buy a house, but I had to sit with all 5 of us trying to sell our homes, it's a little unfair. And so I applaud the continuation of the US government to take that bilateral approach. And because the governments are also different and unique and the situations are also different and unique, it's very difficult to lump Central Asia together. We do it with the Balkans and the Baltics and many regions. But Central Asia, and I will say to everyone in this room, clearly there's a reason you're focused on Central Asia, and you're focused on some of the countries within Central Asia. It's the coolest place in the region in the entire world, right? I do a lot of work in Europe. I'm sorry, but it's really boring compared to working in Turkmenistan or working in Central Asia. So you know what? You're working in a really cool place. Take advantage of it. Pour your heart and time and effort into it because we can still make a difference, right? And that's the beauty of it. And Europe, yeah, we tweak things on the margins, but we're not making significant progress and significant difference. But here we can. And now is a really special time. Now is a very unique time for many of the countries with the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. We're clearly seeing very different approaches from many of the governments. And so now is a very important time to continue to have this type of engagement. I actually wrote down a bunch of notes and I haven't said any of them yet. See how professional I am. I wrote it down on a piece of paper this morning. I want to go back for once, also back in the beginning of sort of the relationship with Turkmenistan for me. I was in the government, left the government. Berdimuhamedov, the previous president, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, now we call him Arkadog, the former president, the father, came to the U.S., gave a speech and said, I asked the U.S. business community to create a bilateral business council. And so we created a bilateral business council. At the time, there was the Uzbek Council, but there wasn't any others. And so we created this council and quite a lot of interest from major oil companies, as you could imagine, Exxon, Chevron, Conoco, Marathon. None of them are members of the Turkmenistan Business Council today, unfortunately, because we've not been able to make any progress. But a lot of the other companies have. We've made a lot of progress with Boeing and GE and Coca-Cola, and a lot of the companies are doing very well. But as you can imagine, and this really goes for almost all of the countries in the region, it's not easy. And I highly recommend not doing it through consultancy. They want to see GE's execs show up. They want to see Coca-Cola's execs show up. They want to see those individuals, and they want to know that they have taken an interest in their country. And really what I tell companies that I work with is there are 4 E's in working, at least with Turkmenistan. You need to have energy, enthusiasm, engagement, and no embarrassment, right? And those are critical for doing business. And I would probably apply them for the most part to the region. But I'll start with the last one, and then no embarrassment, right? And that doesn't mean, I mean, obviously, spilling something. I tell companies that I advise, don't ever call out a government official in a letter and say they weren't doing a good job. But at the same time, don't praise them either. And for those who are part of the region, you understand that, right? That you understand that there's a reason you don't want to be praised. You don't want to be singled out, because then if you are singled out, then there's questions about what are you doing with these individuals? So just simple things like that. But embarrassment is obviously a big one for the Turkmen. Engagement, I'm going backwards. Engagement, people make the mistake all the time of I have a relationship with the president of Turkmenistan. I meet and have met 2 or 3 times a year with the president of Turkmenistan for the past 17 years. Eric will get me a meeting with the president. And if the president says we're going to do something, we're going to do it. Well, that's not true. You actually, believe it or not, have to work up and down the chains of the government, down to the expert level, through the hierarchy and back up to the president. The president, believe it or not, does not say, do this and it is done. There is actually a lot more bureaucracy and infrastructure within the government. And I have companies all the time that make that mistake. They're like, we went in the meeting, Eric got us a meeting, we told the president what we wanted, and they're going to buy it, right? Well, they don't buy it. You have to convince the experts up and down the line and have their buy-in and their support. And when I say do it with, I have 6 minutes, with enthusiasm, what I mean by that is you have to drink the tea, right? You have to spend time understanding the culture. I can't tell you all the fun things that I have done in Turkmenistan, like swimming in underground lakes, and going on camel tours and drinking the fermented camel milk, and all kinds of things that the Turkmen were important to them that they wanted me to do, right? And so you do those things and you do them with enthusiasm. We have so many people, Americans, that make mistakes. They fly into Turkmenistan for the first time and they sit in their room and they say, "Oh my God," call their wife or their husband, "This place is so weird. There's weird things happening. It's bizarre. It's crazy." They're listening to you. like, come on, this is 101 stuff, right? And so you can't go around disparaging the countries and saying they're weird, right? Like, no one wants to be told they're weird. And so, Americans, and not just Americans, but a lot of foreign businessmen and women, and even diplomats. I can show you a list of diplomats that the Turkmen don't like for mistakes they've made. You have to appreciate and respect their culture and do it with enthusiasm, right? Like, we don't need a bunch of Americans all around the world. We need a bunch of diversity around the world, and we can learn things from the Turkmen and from other cultures as well. And that's what they want more than anything else. They want our respect, right? They want our trust and they want our respect, and they're willing to do things that are of mutual benefit, but they're not going to just do things for the sake of doing them with us, and especially with the Americans, because we are so much harder to work with than many other countries or companies from countries who are willing to do things in a different way than the Americans and the Brits, right? Let's be very clear. The Americans and the Brits don't pay any type of bribes or any type of extra incentives or deals or anything else. But there are a lot of companies from other countries that will do that. And that makes it a heck of a lot easier to get things through when you're doing that. So Americans are difficult. And so we have to understand that, appreciate that, and go the extra level, the extra mile. And when I say energy, and I know I'm getting short on my time, so I'm going to wrap up. But when I say energy, when you meet with, I'm not all Central Asians, but especially when you meet with Turkmen, they're very conservative. They're very stoic. They're very serious. They want to be taken very serious, so they're not going to be silly. They're going to wear a white shirt. They're going to wear a black tie. They're going to wear a black suit, and they're going to have a green pin with a Turkmen flag on. And that's how you know they're government officials. And they're going to be very stoic, and they're going to be very conservative and reserved. And so my advice is to bring energy, be American. Don't try to be them. Don't show up in a white shirt and a black tie and like try to be their friend because you're wearing their outfit. No, like, be American. I mean, I can't tell you how many pink ties I've worn when I've gone to meet with the president of Turkmenistan, because I want to bring my energy and I want to bring the energy of America, and I want to represent my culture and who I am as he represents his culture and who he is. And do it with energy. I mean, smile, right? Smile, shake his hand, get to know them as people, as friends. And that's the best way to do business. Once you become friends, once you have become, you've had the tea, you've earned the trust, you've shown respect, you haven't said they're weird, you begin to build a friendship. And the Turkmen, especially, are very, very loyal people. They're very good friends, and they're good friends to have, not just in business, but in life. And so take the extra effort, build the relationship more than anything else. For business, it's not about price. It's not about quality. It's not about the technology. It's about the relationship and the friendship. And if they like you, they trust you, you have mutual respect, and you have mutually beneficial projects, you will be successful in doing business in Turkmenistan. If you take any other approach, it's going to be very difficult. Boom, 150.
150, minute 50 seconds left. Extraordinary. Thank you. And for the record, I agree with everything you said.
Except no
Everything,
Wow.
no exceptions.
Okay.
Outstanding.
Can I drop the mic?
Our next speaker is Sobir Kurbanov.
Thank you so much. And I'm putting my timer for 12 minutes. Yes. First of all, I wanted to thank GW and Central Asia Program, Sebastian, for giving me this opportunity to speak today. I have best memory of engagement with the program. I was working here with the fellows in 2017 when I just moved from Tajikistan, United States, and I also had records of publications, GW, and it was a great experience. So thank you again. In my presentation, I want to talk about the sources of areas of economic insecurity for Central Asia, and what is the role of private sector? What are the current efforts being to address the source of insecurity, and what is the role of private sector, and how we can do it through sort of regional approach, regional economic integration and cooperation, which is very trendy now. So basically, Central Asia is the size of Europe, probably. It's a huge region with a huge territory, but the population around 70 million. And the region is now faced with multiple sources of insecurity. And I'd like to highlight a few of them. First is the energy insecurity. So the region is very much dependent on fuel, on fossil fuel and hydropower. Now with the climate change, the rivers are melting, there is less snow accumulation, and the climate is becoming more and more extreme. So you saw the whole kind of energy blackouts episodes in Tajikistan, Uzbekistan this year, last year, and in March this year, almost all of Tajikistan was in a blackout situation. The same happened with Uzbekistan last year, and at the same time, the region depends on energy imports from other parts of the world, and notably from Russia. So that exposes Central Asia in a high energy dependency, although we have huge resources, but we cannot manage them well, and there is no mechanism for regional water energy cooperation in the region. They're not yet developed in a way. The second source of insecurity is actually the transport and transit insecurity for Central Asia. The region, 80% of the oil and export trade of Kazakhstan depends on Northern Corridor. There are lots of talks about Middle Corridor, Trans-Caspian Corridor, but the reality is that the capacity of Trans-Caspian Corridor is very low. So Kazakhstan has to depend on Russia in exporting its oil, and it's also part of Eurasian Economic Union. And it's a source of insecurity. Something has to be done. Turkmenistan very much depends on energy imports and connections with China and Russia as well. It doesn't have that kind of room to wiggle and diversify the energy trade, although it's very rich in oil and gas and hydrocarbons. The Middle Corridor is there. Lots been talks about this, but not much has been done so far. The third area of insecurity is food insecurity. And it might be surprising because Central Asia is an agriculture abundant region. We produce lots of crops and the staples, but at the same time, for the key staples, Central Asia depends heavily on imports from Russia. That's wheat and sugar, or vegetable oil, and the agriculture inefficiencies are still high. Water losses are high. The private farming is not yet developed, and the domestic interregional trade is not yet there. So, and the fourth sources of insecurity is the huge sources, basically jobs insecurity, labor market insecurity. There are not enough jobs in Central Asia for the quickly growing Central Asia population with the demographics of around 40 people, 45% being young people. So there has to be a strategy to export labor outside, and it's okay. Many parts of the regions, countries of the world export their labor outside, but the problem is Central Asia again. The export of labor very much depends on one destination, which is Russia. And from what you see these days, the events happening and involving Russia, it's actually increasing the very negative attitude towards Central Asian migrants and increasing the risk of their return. But the remittances, they provide about 20–30% of GDP. For Central Asia, and around 4 million of Central Asians are working in Russia on a seasonal basis. And it's a huge mass of people who can affect the dynamics of the region. And the private sector in Central Asia is not able to develop sufficient jobs to absorb that kind of mass of people. And education system is also still lagging, especially technical education system. And the fifth source of insecurity is basically regional economic fragmentation. The cost of trade in Central Asia is the regional trade is probably 80% higher than in other parts of the world. And although the interregional trade is growing, it is still low. It is still about, and this is, I want to caution, this is data of 2020, about 15% of total interregional trade was among the countries of Central Asia. Nowadays, it's probably 2025, it is growing, but it's still low compared to other regions, like in ASEAN region or in the European Union, like 50–60% of trade is among the members of the bloc. In Central Asia, still trade is occurring with the outside markets. And again, these markets are mostly, they're not diversified. These are mostly Russia, China, for energy trade, for food imports. The region is not yet connected to other markets globally, and it's a problem. So with all these kind of challenges towards regional integration, towards food, energy, water shortages, the climate change is making things worse. Weather becomes more extreme, crops are affected. The water level is turning down, and agriculture, the water losses are still high. The efforts of the Central Asian governments towards regional economic integration are very notable. There has been a notable increase in heads of states meetings and events, high-level summits over the last year. But the private sector is not always part of this kind of gatherings and meetings and engagements. What usually happens, the heads of states are having the meetings, and then there is some sort of kind of business forum on a select level with a few companies in there and with the government in one room. So there is no like kind of representative platform of business and government, business dialogue and B2G, B2B level kind of engagement. So, and the private sector can play actually a huge role in addressing these sources of economic insecurity in Central Asia, like through private farming and efficient irrigation. There is a way to improve the water efficiency and agriculture productivity through engaging private sector into the public-private partnership models. There is a way to develop green energy and renewable energy solutions to diversify the energy supply. And there's also a huge role for the private sector to create jobs if they provided this opportunity and the regulations investment climate is improved. Obviously, the private sector could be key to diversification and the promoting regional economic integration. We at CIPE this year conducted a survey of about 500 SMEs in Central Asia, and 75% of them responded they very much want to be part of regional economic cooperation integration efforts. But 57% responded they have no information. There is no any kind of a common platform where the private sector could exchange this information. The farmers in Isfara, in Fergana Valley, Uzbekistan, they want to trade, that they don't know much about the regulations, the transit and transport policies, the customs regulations and the tax regulations in the neighboring countries, although they just live across the border, literally. And the same applies to other sectors. The drivers who are passing the trucks from one region, one country to another, they have to change the cars, they have to change the, have to get the, the visas. And the tourists are coming to one country, they cannot travel to other countries. So there are lots of constraints and problems. And what we are trying to do at CIPE, we've just launched, as Elena just mentioned, the B5+1 platform. It's a business engagement platform on the margins of C5+1, Central Asia 5+1, United States, a diplomatic engagement platform. This is a very interesting initiative, and we hope it will be a sustainable initiative. And it was really great to see Elena and my other partners in Almaty on our B5+1 forum 2 weeks ago. We brought together around 250 people representing US businesses, associations, chambers, Central Asian business associations. And our model is actually to bring not just individual companies and investors, but bring business associations, because behind these associations are members, companies, and they really speak through their collective voice to the government. And this is the model where the business is telling the government what to do and providing their recommendations. It's a very new model. Thank you. I'm finishing. Very new model for Central Asia, because usually it's vice versa. It's government telling the business what to do, not the business what to do to the government. But we really appreciate the commitment of Kazakhstan government to host this first forum. And yeah, it was a great discussion, conversations. I think what was notable is it was private sector-led initiative. We hope it will continue, and we'll be working with chamber associations, US Chamber of Commerce, US-Kazakhstan Business Council, US-Uzbekistan, American-Uzbekistan Chamber of Commerce, and also representing other countries of Central Asia in promoting this initiative and continuing this dialogue and bringing really private sector on board in solving all these kind of multiple challenges. And because the reality is that individually, each country of Central Asia is not a big deal even for American investors. We need to promote the common region. We need to be mindful that there are lots of other regions in the world which are attractive for American businesses and not that remote, not the difficult to do business in. But by creating a common market where we're talking about 77 million and the huge territory, we can actually be more attractive, and it also can promote the inter-regional trade and make Central Asia more resilient to external shocks. So and the private sector can play a huge role in this. Thank you so much.
38 seconds left. You've almost caught Elena. Our last speaker on this panel is Dr. Ayoobi. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. I think you won't forget my name because I have a pair of names. And every time I introduce myself somewhere, they never forget my name. I think Patty's there. I was in a reception last week. Someone called me from far away, say, Ayoobi. I couldn't recognize the person, but I could understand why. Just a few more details about myself. I looked at my title on the website of the American University of Central Asia. I'm also an associate professor. I actually teach sustainable development and social enterprise. And my previous job, I have been in this job for the past 6 months, but my previous job, I was based in Xinjiang, the Uyghur Autonomous Region of China, with Karak Institute, Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation. I worked there for 5 years, and my job was to work with senior government officials and help them build capacity to engage. This is where I will just start my talk. What I heard from colleagues here, we seem to have some sort of a disengagement between international development agencies or international businesses and the local intelligentsia in a way. So with that, I will start my little outline that I have here. So I will just go directly to my recommendations. I think most of the things were talked. If you look at Central Asia, historically, it has been very important because of the ancient Silk Road. And, I think up until 1500s, when the maritime routes were not expanded, and Central Asia was very important and very significant. And based on my understanding for the past 5 or so many years I've been there, I feel a lot of efforts are being made to revive that significance. And I think we have to really highlight the role of China here as well in a positive way, that they are really working hard too. But we don't know the ultimate goal, but so far so good. I think they're trying to revive the historical importance of the region. And for me, Central Asia should really look into leveraging emerging donors. Central Asia shouldn't really look at only OECD countries, but also emerging donors. But if you look at the historical trend in terms of development, I lost track because I was an academic before. I believe that since the Bretton Woods system and up maybe a decade ago, only 13 countries were able to join the emerging or development status in a way. But now with emerging states like China and other sources or alternative sources of support for certain countries, and we see a lot of movements in different parts of the world. And I think Central Asia could certainly take advantage of that. Another one would be aligning strategic importance actively, is the word here, actively, with major international development, trade, and commerce initiatives. I see there's a lot of debate about Belt and Road Initiative. you don't know what future holds. But for Central Asia, that really, Central Asia doesn't really need to look into politicizing development. They should really look into what they can do, how they can bargain with Belt and Road Initiative, and how they can bargain with the US, with the EU, with whoever, as long as they bargain in the interest of society. And also, I heard my colleagues from the business sector that, they also need to attract major businesses who are, the inventors who are creating and, new products. And as an example would be Tesla. I know a lot of people politically might not like that, but I think Central Asia could really look into ways of engaging with major or game changers in a way in business, I believe they say. And also improving governance and transparency. This would be really the core of my talk. Based on my interaction in Central Asia, something that was lacking and that leads to disengagement is maybe in political science, we say political animals. The uh, lack of political animals in a way, individuals who really care for for the region, individuals who care for their country, for their society, but they're not in a position that they can really make decisions. I see ambassadors here, and I have been in the government historically in the past, and I have watched how government officials from certain Central Asian states can communicate with ambassadors and with foreign uh, donors. You could clearly see that, we cannot generalize. Historically, you could see that the bargaining was not taking place there. The bargaining was not in the interest of the society. In some ways, the ambassador might have switched role, trying to bargain in the interest of the society. They're always looking into some, but I think in recent times, we see a lot of change. We actually came, Elena was also invited. She didn't join us. Last night, we were at the embassy of Uzbekistan. And the ambassador is a fascinating individual, and he's really engaging. So he's engaging and doing bargaining. And we were talking about the RLC and how we can help. And my organization, Project C.U.R.E, has been helping RLC with equipment and supplies. And here in this, I mentioned governance, not government, because I look into economy, society, and the state. So I think everybody needs to join hands. And again, there has to be some sort of an environment or space. I think space are being created. It was 2022, I believe, that Uzbekistan was moving so fast in terms of doing business. I think that was a World Bank report that highlighted that. So I think a space is being created, and I think and governance should be the focus, and transparency. And something I also experienced myself, most of the activities we engaged within CARAC, the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation, we had 5 development priority clusters. And almost all of these development clusters were led by women. And these women were not from anywhere else, they were from Central Asia. They all had PhD. Elena is here. She's also from Central Asia, an example. They all had a vision for the region, but they could not do it through government, through their local government, but they were with major organizations such as World Bank. But I was very impressed with the Asian Development Bank, ADB, and they have specific, I think, incentive or vision or approach to really offer space for women and intelligentsia of Central Asia. I mean, my counterpart at ADB, when I was with the CARAC Institute, was from Kazakhstan. I don't know if you probably know Dr. Laziza, fascinating human being to work with and a fascinating person to really understand the region. Speaking of chai here, we actually initiated. We had something is called CARAC Chai, Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Chai. That was a dialogue. We were promoting informal dialogue so people are not afraid, so they can speak and engage, so we understand what's happening around Central Asia as a region. But CARAC, by the way, is not only 5 Central Asian states. It starts with China, especially the Uyghur Autonomous Region of China, and also the inner Mongolia region of China, all the way to Azerbaijan, Georgia. Azerbaijan is also a member, Pakistan is a member, Mongolia is a member, so 11 member countries. So with that, if I still have time, because this is the end of the time, I can leave some time for question and answer. And just I want to conclude with the bargaining. I think I'm also my students are doing a lot of work. My MBA students on Central Asia, trying to understand the disconnect is with some of these major development grants, even going to Central Asia. The disconnect is between, in technical word, the output and the outcome. So you can go as far as the output. Let's put it this way, even this intelligentsia of Central Asia, they are engaged in designing development grants, but they can go as far as the output. But then the outcome on the ground is what is really missing there. Again, that requires governance and transparency that I believe it's happening. And I believe that the future is positive. I'm also originally from Central Asia. I am so proud to hear people speaking of Central Asia so highly. Yes, we have amazing food, amazing people, amazing region. So with that, I conclude, and if there's any question, I'll be here.
Thank you very much. We do have about 10 minutes for questions before we break for lunch. So are there questions? Could we do Janice first and then you, sir?
Thanks. Janice Howig from the U.S. Helsinki Commission. One of the things I'd like to ask about is some of the obstacles to foreign investment. If you might talk a bit about if there are issues with corruption, for example, or with judicial systems. And I ask that not just to be critical, but to figure out, are there any programs that the United States or international organizations could help with to strengthen capacity and strengthen the framework for foreign investment?
I'm happy to jump in. Yes, is the answer. I mean, for most of these governments, and especially at least Turkmenistan, I will speak on behalf of, when they look at doing business with America, everything is in buckets, right? And they put the government and the business in the same bucket together, right? And so they're going to do this much business with America, this much business with Germany, this much business with Turkey, this much with China, right? And so we have to have U.S. engagement in order to be successful, we being business. The U.S. Embassy, the ambassador is critical for us. The entire embassy is critical for us. And so having that engagement and having the U.S. engage is essential. It's a long way to go, right? And for a lot of government officials, they're like, what's the return on the investment, right? It's not a big return as so far as they can tell. So getting more government officials engaged and having them at the highest levels is extremely helpful for us. If you look at other countries like Germany or France or others, if the deal is big enough, their chancellor will jump on a plane and fly to another country to help advocate for a deal. Well, Biden's not doing that, right? Like that's not the way we operate. So we're continually operating, we're continually behind other countries as we're trying to advocate for certain projects. And as I said in my remarks earlier, we don't do business the same way as other countries or other businesses in other countries do. And at least for the Turkmen, and I think this is for most countries, they know that. And so they're not asking our companies for bribes. They're not going down that road because they know the answer is no. They know it'll kill the deal. So they're smart enough to know not to ask us. But they will ask other businesses from other countries in the region. So there are a ton of hurdles. It's very, very difficult. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of patience, but having U.S. government is essential for us.
Yeah, and
Elena?
maybe just Eric covered most of the aspects that might be challenging to consider investments, but I think that number one is that we need to synchronize, like Eric said, two models. In the US, it's leading from behind. The private sector leads, and then the US government follows and kind of like helps and supports the business. However, in Central Asia, the government not only leads, but the government is the player, is the critical element in considering the investments. Countries sometimes are under pressure to deliver, especially since there is a social media activity and they really want to produce results. And in business, it doesn't work like that. We created a business council, just as an example, in 2017, the US-Kyrgyzstan Business Council, US-Tajikistan Business Council. Both of them are thriving, but it does take time to get on the footage and actually produce the results. Another thing is realistic expectations. Sometimes the expectations are really exaggerated, and you really need to look from the foreign direct investment from the business point of view. Does it make profit? What is the return on investment? And where is the market that we're going to sell all those goods that are going to be produced in Central Asia? Just an example now with the war in Ukraine, there is a belief that companies will then localize in Central Asia. Yes and no, it depends on the business. But again, realistically, you have to look at the neighboring markets and see, does Turkey, for example, or Middle East and North Africa produce the goods and services that can already saturate and oversaturate the neighborhood? And I think that is fundamentally, the technocrats in Central Asia are great. They're very well versed on the geopolitics. They're very driven by the security, by the word of security. We would like them to be driven by the word business and profitability. The word profit is not actually doesn't have a positive connotation. Usually when you talk about the profit, people think, oh, here they are trying to take advantage of us. So we need really to change the mindset and ensure that actually profit will be shared among all the stakeholders.
Okay,
yeah.
Elena, can we,
Sure.
Sobir wants to have an intervention too.
I'll try to be very quick, yeah, because I work on this topic for years, and now I'm leading the program on improving business environment in Central Asia at CIPE. So if in one thing, I would say the biggest barrier and problem for investors in Central Asia is not the absence of laws or absence of regulations, but actually implementation, law enforcement, implementation of tax regulation, business regulation, regulatory environment overall. What investors are looking, they're looking for predictability and stability. They don't looking for tax rates or some sort of tax breaks or holidays. That's fine, but it's not the critical. They're looking for stable and predictable tax regime. And if you get a concession, this concession will not be revoked in 5 years with the change of the government. So yeah, they appreciate the environment which is stable and secure, and when they can work predictably, because it's a difficult region. I mean, they invest there.
We only have a couple
Yeah,
of minutes
thank
left,
you.
so I want to get a couple more questions. Could we have, you had a question?
Could I also add to that point? I wanted.
No, let's move on, please, because we're running out of time. Could I have this gentleman here?
Thank you so much. My name is Timur Shagimuratov. I'm actually from George Mason University, from the Central Asian Students Association. And firstly, I just wanted to thank you all so much for the work that you're doing in Central Asia. As a person from Central Asia myself, it's really nice to see this amazing work for economic development. But my question is, you guys are working in the private sector. What might you say would be the role of like American or multinational NGOs, nonprofits, like something, for example, like Eurasia Foundation, who are working, to improve infrastructure, but also some economic developments there in your goals? Like, do you work with these organizations? Do you have any shared goals and initiatives? And what might you say would be the roles for an organization like this?
Loaded question. I think that I don't know if from the business point.
Elena, you have 1 minute.
Okay, so from the business point of view, I think it's capacity building, because that's at the core. You have highly competent people, but sometimes who are not very well versed on the fundamentals of doing business and how to work with American companies. So it's education, and I'm not talking about English or language kind of like based trainings. I'm talking about the bringing people here and allowing them to see how difficult it is to operate in the US, not only for a foreign entity, for example, but also for American entity. It's a very demanding market. It's a market that is focused on the profits. So coming here and understanding and the Eurasia Foundation can bring the legislators who create the legislation, right, and work with the private sector. I think that number one. Number two is bringing here critical mining sector is quite popular nowadays. So bringing young professionals, we can actually go back then to Central Asia and help American companies to invest and do business there, because right now critical mining sector is occupied by
Dr. Ayoobi.
Thank you. So I'm sorry, but I have to go back to that question, and then I come back to yours. Because that's related to what we did when I was with C.U.R.E Institute. We actually wrote a book that's called Unlocking Private Investment for Sustainable Infrastructure. That was with the Asian Development Bank and Institute, ADBI. There, we talked a lot about how to attract investment, including FDI. But there's also this notion of digital FDI that's emerging in the region. Something that we understood, we try to really see how we can attract foreign investment or private investment in general. I think my colleague mentioned about predictability and stability of governments there. Sometimes you have to be friends with the president, you mentioned, right? So that is not the way business people would like to proceed with their, long-term investment. So sustainable infrastructure in terms of water, energy, and agriculture nexus, because most of the Central Asian infrastructure are no longer responding to the needs. There is where the investment is needed. And we looked at the regional platform, so regional approach, where we create space or projects through multinational development banks like Asian Development Bank, or EBRD is also very active there. And now there are emerging institutions like AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and also ISDB, Islamic Development Bank. They are really active in the region. We thought that would be the best approach and also create some sort of a space. I heard PPP here. So yeah, public-private partnership, but on sustainable infrastructure.
Okay. Sebastian, do we have time for one more question or? All right. So there was a question back here.
Can I just say real quickly, or 10 seconds on for Turkmenistan, the NGOs, my advice is to work through the United Nations, the UN. They take a lot of stock, Turkmen put a lot of stock in the UN because they're a positively neutral country. NGOs otherwise, not without the blessing of their government.
Kate?
Thank you all for your really interesting comments. You started to answer my question already, but my question for all of you is sort of how do you see the role of international financial institutions in the region with regard to the types of development projects and business development that you've been engaged in describing?
Go to the former World Bank.
I used to work for the World Bank and IMF in Central Asia. So usually they perceived as a source of financing, but they also source of we call it policy dialogue. They engaged with the governments to negotiate the development loans, and with this comes conditionality. The conditionality game is always difficult because it's no more in the Washington consensus era. Central Asia can get same money with no stringent conditions from China. So it's difficult. It's very challenging, but still we have the IFIs. I mean, the IMF and the World Bank. They have they don't just come bring money. They come expertise. They come with technical assistance. They bring capacity building, and this is I think the most important. But you have to understand the motivations and political economy of the region. What is the commitment and motivation of President of Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, how to convince them that liberalizing some sector or the economy is good for them. It's not representing a threat to stability and security of the political systems. I think it's very important to be mindful of these conditions and be very smart in this policy dialogue. But otherwise, IFIs, they're critically important. They are there. They're part of, and also the United States is a major shareholder in the World Bank and IMF, and so it's not just kind of anonymous World Bank and IMF. There are much more, and we have to work more with Ayoob John just mentioned that the emerging donors, those IFIs have to have the broader kind of engagement in policy, speak in one voice, not just with the American IFIs, but the Western kind of IFIs, but with the EU, IMF, World Bank, ADB, Asian Infrastructure Bank, speak in one voice. There are also these donor coordination councils, but not very active, and also bring China to this conversation, because the Chinese investors facing very same problems with the faced by American investors, but they just don't speak about them openly. But yeah, it's interesting.
I think that I'll just add to what Sobir said, that IFIs are indeed critical players in certain markets or in certain sectors. I think that there are some technical issues that we always try to discuss with the IFIs. Number one is that if you look at the kind of like at the chart of the most leading countries that win the tenders, the US is not among them. That's number one. Why is that? It's because there are certain limitations, for instance, for certain territories. Certain institutions do not consider deals that are less than a certain limit, let's say $10 million. Sometimes we want a lesser deal. Sometimes their procurement guidelines are very onerous and companies prefer to go commercial routes and just go and win the deals. Sometimes there is also a very intensive reporting period that companies have to put their manpower in. Again, we're operating in a very fast-moving environment where human resources are really thin-stretched. But the most important one is that, again, if you look at the competition, so you have China, as Sobir said, but then you have to look at the Americans. We are very expensive when it comes to the IFIs. I mean, when it comes to the tenders, right? So when it comes to the machinery and equipment or supply of any goods, then we are out of competition because we are overpriced. However, we do price very well when it comes to technical expertise and when it comes to services. So, and it's again, it's just the ability of the US government as a major shareholder, as Sobir said, to participate and just to make sure that American companies do. But again, it's you have to look at the kind of like the technicalities. Often when I speak with companies, they say, well, we are aware of this tender. However, we're trying to pursue this commercial deal, and companies have different priorities. But certain companies do specialize in the IFIs, and the majority of them are in the SME sector, for example, in the consulting business. And so we do hope that there will be more American companies, because that leads to actually more tenders won by American and greater supply of American equipment to the region.
I am mindful that we are between you and lunch, which is a very hazardous position to take. But Eric Stewart, my old friend, has asked me for 10 seconds. So
For Turkmenistan, it's the political message is more important than the actual financing, that the US is behind this.
all right, with that, Sebastian, I think it's time to break for lunch, is it not?
Next panel is at 1:15.
Yeah, next panel is at 1:15, so please be back in 54 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you all very much.